Kansas City is a weird place. Here are the 10 weirdest things about living here in Kansas City. If you stick around until the end, I will share with you my strangest Kansas City experience. So this channel is to give you practical advice about moving here. So none of these things are going to be useless facts. They're all going to affect your day-to-day life because I love it when people reach out to us with help for moving to Kansas or Missouri in the Kansas City metro area, anywhere in the Kansas City metro area. So these facts are not going to be silly facts like once they almost named Kansas City Possum Trot or Rabbitville in 1853. That's actually a true fact. That doesn't matter to your life. All of these matter to your life if you're going to live here. And if you're going to live here, we would love to talk to you and help you relocate here to Kansas City. Give us a call. 816-4-MOVE-KC is our number. Call or text us. We promise we will get back to you in a timely manner. Even if we're at appointments, we'll call you back. We'll text you back. We will get in touch with you if you're moving here to Kansas City. 816-4-MOVE-KC. We've helped a ton of people move here over the years, and we would love to help you relocate here to Kansas City. Number one is that we are one city in two states. Now, why this might matter to you is that there actually is some beef between the Missourians and the Kansans on the Kansas City kind of border. It's a strange thing, especially if you move here and you think Kansas City is in Kansas, or if you know a little bit better and you know most of Kansas City is in Missouri. One of the practical strange things about being one city in two states is that you very frequently will cross the state border. You'll do a lot of things in Kansas, even if you live in Missouri, and if you live in Kansas, downtown is in Missouri, so if you want to come downtown, you're going to have to come downtown to Missouri anyway. It can get really strange if you work in one area, like if you work in Kansas and you live in Missouri, or if you live in Missouri and you work in Kansas, all your taxes can be a little bit wonky that way. It's not impossible. I know people who have moved here and done that, but I would say by far the strangest thing is the existing beef between the Missourians and the Kansans. It's not with everybody. A lot of the younger people that moved here, I'm talking about people who are millennials and younger, they don't have any beef. Like, I have only lived in Missouri the whole time I've been here, and I have no ill will towards the Kansans. In fact, I have a lot of friends who live in Kansas, and I think it's a wonderful place. Overland Park is beautiful. Lenox is wonderful. Leawood is probably the top suburb in Kansas City. I love those areas. I love spending time in those areas, but if you get to the older crowd, you'll find that the Kansas stereotype of Missouri's is that we're kind of, country bumpkins, a little bit backward. I don't want to paint with a broad brush, so I won't say everybody thinks this way, but this can be the stereotype. And then for the Missourians, the stereotype for the Kansans is that, they're kind of hoity-toity, well-to-do, higher society, holier-than-thou kind of attitude. I would say that's typically a stereotype that the older generation carries. Now, where that older generation cutoff is, I don't necessarily know, so I don't want to group people into a big group. But let me tell you a quick story to illustrate this. When I was showing a house in Olathe, which is a suburb in the Johnson County side, a very desirable place to live, great school districts, very safe. I was showing a few houses, and the seller was there at a showing. And when he found out that I actually lived in Missouri, he was very cold towards me and said, "Look, we really don't like Missourians here." He was an older gentleman, probably in his 70s or 80s or something like that. And I don't know, maybe he was just having a bad day. And then I'll tell you another stereotype. One of my friends described the Kansans as like, they all think they're better than us. And I would say, again, that's not 100% true, but those are the stereotypes that persist. Another thing that Missourians don't like is that all the activity in downtown, like Union Station, Science City, World War I Museum and Memorial, those types of areas, all of that, they don't like that the Kansas side is flourishing because of all the cool things that happen on the Missouri side. They kind of feel like Missouri should flourish because of Missouri and Kansas should flourish because of Kansas. I think that's a little bit silly. I mean, we're all one city here, and I don't necessarily see a state line road as like a dividing line. But if you move here, you may find that you don't like that beef that people have, and that's going to be something that you're going to have to deal with if you move here. Again, not with everybody, but with some people. So the number two weird thing about living here in Kansas City is that everybody here dresses like a tourist, but they dress like a tourist with their own city merchandise, right? I've got my KC heart shirt, and I've got 2 or 3 of these shirts because I think they look cool, but I've never quite seen it as prevalent as it is here. And it's not necessarily just like the sports teams. Like there's a ton of Chiefs gear around, ton of Royals gear around, a ton of Sporting KC gear around. All of that stuff is common. In Kansas City, you have just Kansas City gear that's just about the city, not necessarily about the teams. That's one thing that I think is unique about Kansas City. One of the ways that it can affect your life is it shows a tremendous amount of city pride. People love it here. We love it here. It's been fantastic for our family to live in Kansas City, and we are going nowhere because this is an awesome place for my kids, my wife, myself, and I think that reflects on the clothes that we wear. So when you go around Kansas City, you're going to see a lot of Kansas City sweatshirts. You're going to see a lot of these Charlie Hustle designs. So one of the things about the heart here is because we are the heart of America, right in the heart of America. That's one of the nicknames for Kansas City. That's why we have these hearts. You'll see these heart designs all around the city as well. If you don't want to take pride in the city that you live in, Kansas City may not be for you. But if you want to come to a place where a lot of people are bought into the future of our city and a lot of people are invested in making Kansas City an awesome place, then Kansas City is the place for you. Number 3 has to do with our city pride and how beautiful our city is, and that is we are the city of fountains. If you didn't know, Kansas City is called Paris of the Plains. It's called Fountain City. All of those things because there are a ton of fountains all around Kansas City. If you go to Country Club Plaza, if you go downtown, if you go to these random areas, they have a lot of fountains. Right now it's really cold. A lot of these fountains are frozen over. However, during the spring, during the summer, those fountains are going in full tilt. It's one thing to have nice parks. It's one thing to have nice common areas, but I think fountains add that awesome atmosphere that kind of adds to the aesthetic of the city. It makes it something that we are known for as Kansas City. The official Kansas City logos, they all incorporate fountains in them. One way that it affects your life is that when you come around, there are a lot of common areas that have fountains that are wonderful areas to hang out, whether you want to bring your kids, whether you just want a nice place to relax and read a book. Kansas City is full of beautiful common areas with a ton of fountains. While for all the positives, there are some negatives to living here in Kansas City. One of the negatives is that our infrastructure is not the best. And what I mean by infrastructure, I'm talking about freeways, I'm talking about, transportation. I'm also talking about like the utility infrastructure, talking about like gas, water, pipelines, and all that kind of stuff. Included in that, I would also include trash. Trash pickup, especially if you live in KC-Mo proper, Kansas City, Missouri proper, is that when you drive around the neighborhoods, you're going to see some trash on the side of the road. You're going to see some trash bags put out in front. The reason is Kansas City, Missouri, for some reason, does not supply us with those garbage bins that you can roll out and put your trash in. What they do is every Friday's our trash pickup day. Every Friday, they say you can leave 2 trash bags out on the curb. Now, when you leave trash bags out on the curb, what happens? These crazy squirrels get into your trash bags. They try to eat your banana peels or your, leftover ice cream or whatever it is, that you're tossing out of your house. So the squirrels rip into the trash bags, and then guess what? By the time the trash pickup comes, these trash men are picking up these bags that have been ripped up by these squirrels. As they toss them into the garbage truck, they rip everywhere and there's trash everywhere. It's a negative thing. I wish that we would just, at least in Kansas City, Missouri, I wish that we would just get these garbage bins that we could just roll out. Okay, talking about infrastructure, I think freeways here are kind of strange. That's one thing that's definitely going to affect you if you decide to move to Kansas City, because you have no way around needing to use the freeways if you need to get around the metro. And some of the freeways are very counterintuitive in terms of how they lay out the signs. One of the things that's tough about the freeways here is that it's really full of short on-ramps. When you're trying to get on a freeway, it's nice to have one long lane where you can pick up speed and then merge. There's a ton of intersections here where they kind of just dump you right into traffic that's going 65 miles per hour, and you just kind of have to wait there for a break, and you have to get your car up to speed really quickly. Okay, so now that we're talking about transportation and streets and all that kind of stuff, one of the strange things that you may be used to, but we certainly weren't used to when we moved here from Los Angeles, was the numbering system of the streets is very counterintuitive. So when we first moved here to Kansas City, we lived in a city called Gladstone. It's a suburb that we'll actually talk about a little bit later, but it's a suburb north of the river in the KC Metro. We loved it there. It was a wonderful place, but we moved to a street called 69th Terrace. Guess what was right next to us? 69th Street. So you have 69th Street, 69th Terrace, and then there was also a 69th Avenue that was at a different part of Kansas City. Super confusing. Don't know who did that, but you get an F. Okay, you failed. 0 out of 10, because that's horrible if you want mail delivered to you. And guess what? Not only was it super horrible for directions and all that kind of stuff, what you would have is, we live, I'm not going to give you our old address, but let's just say 1069th Terrace in Gladstone. There was also a 1069th Street in Gladstone. So guess what happens with that? Yeah, your mail goes everywhere. And that's another thing that we're going to talk about a little bit later about the mailing system and all that kind of stuff here. But I remember a time when I used to, flip golf clubs. I used to buy them for cheap and then, mark them up and sell them. So I used to flip them, but I would have packages consistently delivered to my door. I remember a particular time I was expecting this golf club. I already had a buyer for it. So I was waiting at the door for it to get delivered. The mailman comes, he leaves, no golf club. So I go to 1069th Street. For some reason, that person would not either would not answer the door. I knew that they had my golf club because every time it wasn't delivered to my house, it was always, delivered to theirs. Eventually I went back and then I did get the golf club back, but to reschedule my meeting with the buyer of the golf club, it was just an annoying thing. It's going to be something that's very common here. Luckily, we don't live on a numbered street. We live on a street that has actually like a name now, and that is super helpful. But if you get here and you want to get around, that's going to be affecting you. Okay, speaking about street numbers and infrastructure and all that, the number 7 weird thing about living in Kansas City, I would say it's the kind of city within the city effect. And let me explain what I mean. I mentioned before we moved to Gladstone, really nice area in Kansas City, but Gladstone itself is a city. It has its own mayor, has its own city council, has its own city hall, has its own governance and everything. Now it's very similar to Kansas City, but it's Gladstone. It's not Kansas City. But strange thing is, Gladstone is completely surrounded by Kansas City. So if you go up from Gladstone, you are back in Kansas City. If you go, east or west, you're back in Kansas City. If you go south, you're back in Kansas City. It's just a strange kind of quirk about living in Kansas City that if you find yourself in one of these jurisdictions that have their own legislation set up and its own municipality, you might get kind of confused. Do you live in Gladstone or do you live in Kansas City? Let me tell you a quick story. I mentioned to you before, I used to, have a lot of things shipped to me, like golf clubs and all that kind of stuff. One time I bought something and I needed it to me at a certain time. And when the shipper went to go and send it to me, they put in my zip code. And instead of it populating as Gladstone, because I did tell them I live in Gladstone, it populated as Kansas City. Now, it was the right zip code. I knew my own zip code, but they did not send it because they were like, well, you said you lived in Gladstone. This says Kansas City. I don't want to send it to the wrong place. Completely wasn't their fault. But you are going to get a lot of that. When you type in a certain zip code, it could pop up as the municipality that you're in, or sometimes it can pop up as Kansas City. Do not be alarmed. It's just one of the weird things about living here in Kansas City. It might be the same as other cities from our past and what we're used to. That was a strange thing. Now, back to some truly awesome things about Kansas City. And one of the weird things, but an awesome thing, is that we will have the first women's only soccer stadium here in Kansas City. And one of the ways that's going to affect your life is it's right next to a bridge called the Christopher Bond Bridge. And you will drive past that soccer stadium, I don't know how many times. And that's going to bring a lot of attention to our city. It's the only soccer stadium in America where it's made specifically for a women's MLS team. All the other soccer stadiums are for the men's teams and all that kind of stuff, but it's the only one that's made for the women's team. I know Patrick Mahomes is a big investor in that stadium and a big supporter of the Kansas City Current, which is the soccer team that's going to be playing in that stadium. But that's going to be one thing that's not only going to affect our economy here, but you're going to be driving past it all the time. You can't miss it. It's awesome. It's going to be open 2024. So if you're watching this after, tell me how it is if you managed to catch a game there. Now, speaking of catching a game and being outside, one of the weird things about Kansas City is our weather. There are such strange weather swings and weather phenomenons here. This past week, it was -10. Right now, as I'm filming this, it's like 50 degrees, all within a week. That's a big weather swing. What happens is, because we're in the heartland, there's no mountains, there's no ocean to act as a buffer or a regulator for the weather patterns that come through here, the clouds and stuff like that. I'm not a meteorologist. This is basically what I read on the internet. So if I'm wrong, drop it in the comments below. Tell me why. But one of the things that you're going to need to know when you get used to living here is that you can have huge weather swings. In Christmas of 2022, my in-laws came to visit and they love being outside. They love doing like these hikes. So we scheduled an urban hike right in the heart of Kansas City. And our tour guide was going to take us around, show us the different landmarks and areas. And it was a really cool hike. Let me tell you, it was awesome. But 2 days before Christmas, we were supposed to go on the hike on the 27th of December. 2 days before Christmas, it was -14. We were like, we're such dummies for booking an outdoor activity when it's so cold. Comes the day of the hike. It is 65 degrees, almost pushing 70 degrees. Okay, so that is like a 60, almost 70-degree temperature change in a matter of a few days. It's one of the weird, quirky things about living here in Kansas City. Now, I will tell you this, it's not all bad. Living here in the winter, it can get super cold, but when you have such big weather swings, if you're an outdoorsman, if you want to get outside, I like golfing. I like being outside. I like going for walks in the park with my kids. These warmer, balmier days that get into the 50s and even the 60s, they afford you the chance to get outside and not be cooped up inside all the time. Now, speaking of Kansas City and getting outside in Kansas City, there is art everywhere in Kansas City. It is a beautiful city because we have a ton of local artists that just do a lot of art. You can see a lot of murals all around the city representing different causes and all of that kind of stuff. But it is a super cool city to explore, to walk around in. There's art walks all around. There's an event called Spray CMO where people will come out and do and showcase their art. It's a really cool art scene. Not only art, but we have a ton of culture as well. You've got museums, you've got Union Station, which is a really old train station. It is a place with a ton of awesome culture. That's one unique, weird thing about Kansas City that may not be true of where you live right now. Okay, so you stuck around to the end of the video. I'm going to share with you my strangest experience working as a Kansas City realtor in Kansas City. It's kind of a two-part story. So the first part is one of my buyers was trying to purchase a house in Kansas City, and customarily I ask, hey, why is the seller selling the house? I want them to know that they're not selling the house because, they have an ongoing feud with their neighbors or because the house next door is, crime hotspot. I don't know. And the strangest answer I've ever gotten is that they're selling their house because their house is haunted and they want to move into their parents' house. Okay. So that's a strange experience to sell a house because it's haunted. And I kind of brushed it off until I went to my own listing appointment. I was trying to list a house to sell in Kansas City. It's already sold now. I sat down with the owner and I talked to them and I said, hey, why are you trying to sell your house in Kansas City? And they said, look, we decided to move out of Kansas City to a different area in Missouri. And the reason that we had to do this is because we felt that our house is haunted. If you come in here and you stay in here, there's a bunch of strange things going on. There's a bunch of the cabinets will open and close by themselves. It's kind of a weird atmosphere where we live in. We don't like it anymore. It was affecting us so much that we decided that we were going to move. And you'd be surprised to know that this is actually not an uncommon occurrence here in Kansas City. There's a ton of kind of paranormal hotspots all around the city where I've heard rumors of, oh, that house is haunted, that house is haunted, my house is haunted. It's a very strange thing about Kansas City. I don't know if that's going to affect your day-to-day life as much as the 10 things that I listed, but just so you know, a lot of haunted houses here in Kansas City.